After learning theories and theoretical contributions, in this video, we'll learn how to develop a theoretical framework. This video is an updated one of my previous video on how to develop a theoretical framework. That video was posted about 2 years ago. In this updated video, I added more explanations and offered more examples. Let's start with what a theoretical framework is. A theoretical framework seeks to develop new arguments or extend existing arguments about relationship between constructs based on logical connections to answer the questions of what, how, when, and why. To do so, the theoretical framework should have at least two elements, constructs and relationships among them. These two elements are exactly the same ones of a theory. The similarity means that your theoretical framework can have only one theory, which includes constructs and relationships. You can also develop a theoretical framework from multiple theories. Either way, the process of building a theoretical framework is very similar to building a house. Theoretical constructs in your theoretical framework are like a pile of stones. Dumping a pile of stones is not enough. To build a house, you'll need to put stones together meticulously. In research, how you put those constructs together comes from how theories describe relationships among the constructs and how existing empirical evidence suggests those relationships. This is why literature review is integrated into the section of theoretical frameworks in an empirical research article, sometimes with a subsection of hypothesis development if you conduct a quantitative study. However, a literature review is not sufficient to function as a theoretical framework if it doesn't describe constructs and relationships. Many articles in educational leadership are not adequately grounded in theories because authors don't draw on any theories or constructs. Rather, they simply summarize existing literature of a phenomenon, for example, the history or importance of a phenomenon, without proposing what constructs and relationships are developed from theories or the literature. As a result, an inadequate theoretical framework undermines theoretical contributions of your research. If you want your research to bring substantive theoretical contributions to the field, you usually cannot find an existing theoretical framework in the literature and then copy and paste it into your research. This is like building a house. If you don't want your house to be just one more house that already exists in your neighborhood, you'd better put those stones together in a different, meaningful way by drawing up on existing theories and literature. As you read empirical research papers, you rarely see how authors develop their theoretical frameworks. You only see end products of a theoretical framework, but not the thought process of how the framework is developed. When a theoretical framework is presented in a cogent way, it is often unclear how authors develop their theoretical frameworks. What is the thought process that leads to the theoretical framework we read in papers? In this video, I try to demystify the process. A caveat at the outset: what I introduce in this video is not an algorithm for developing a theoretical framework. Its application takes creativity, a commitment to clarity, enormous work, and a great deal of hard thinking. The first step to develop a theoretical framework is to read extensively. Reading is a must. This is the first step that helps you identify problems worthy of study and choose among potential theoretical constructs and theories to investigate them. Reading brings you up to speed to the latest development in the field of educational leadership. If you struggle with finding appropriate theories for your research, this is a foundational step you are committed to. Since educational leadership is an interdisciplinary field, it is not sufficient if you read only the literature in educational leadership. The theory of loosely coupled systems was developed by Carl Weick, who was a psychologist. To keep abreast of intellectual development, you need to read extensively by exploring the literature in neighboring fields, such as psychology, sociology, social psychology, administrative science, organizational science, neuroscience, and history. Extensive reading exposes you to a world of knowledge on human behavior in organizational contexts that you would not come across in the literature of educational leadership. Different scientific fields have different theoretical groundings, along with their strengths and weaknesses. The minds and ideas in other fields can stimulate your thinking. When I read, my train of thoughts runs very fast, and my brain is full of ideas. In addition to bouts of voracious readings, I've been reading an article almost every day. Most of those articles are not in the field of educational leadership, but they have turned out influential in shaping my thinking as a scholar. With many things to distract your attention, finding time for reading can be very challenging, but it's well worth it because it provides an opportunity to have uninterrupted time with great minds manifested through texts you read. As you read, you'll need to challenge assumptions, identify competing ideas, and ask what is missing. Let's first talk about challenging assumptions. Don't be an uncritical devotee of any theory, regardless of how popular that theory is. Researchers are not saints. Scientists are not prophets. Their ideas should not be taken as unquestionable axioms. In my previous video on what theory is not, we've learned that theory is never completely right. It's only less wrong. Take existing theories with a pinch of salt. A healthy dose of skepticism is needed if you strive to seek truth and make substantive contribution to your field. René Descartes once said, "If you would be a real seeker after truth, it is necessary that at least once in your life you doubt, as far as possible, all things." Challenge accepted wisdom and common assumptions. Don't go with the flow. It is a misconception that a consensus is truth. Truth remains true regardless of how many people embrace it. In science, a majority view does not mean the view is truer. By contrast, a dissenting view may turn out to be true. Some theories rise to prominence soon after their publication. Others remain dormant for many years until, for some unforeseeable reason, a scientific community takes notice, while others will be forever ignored. Alan Turing's idea on a thinking machine performing different tasks didn't attract much attention in 1936 when he first proposed it, but the idea came to fruition during World War II. Today, we call those machines on which we write documents, send emails, read news, perform data analysis, and attend online meetings. A currently popular theory doesn't necessarily mean it has explanatory potency, and vice versa. Many great scientists in history are great precisely because they deviated from the majority view. Likewise, the popular views we hold now may turn out to be outright wrong in 100 years. A few hundred years ago, the consensus view pushed by René Descartes was that only humans were conscious. Animals were seen as mindless robots without consciousness. Few think that today. You treat your dog as your family member. If we humans are conscious, then there is little reason not to believe that mammals with their similar brains are conscious too. Animals not only have consciousness, but also have different personality traits. Recently, primatologists Frans de Waal at Emory University vividly documented how politics were played out in a chimpanzee colony through wielding power, competing over rank in a social hierarchy, conflict resolution, ambition, coalition forming, currying of favors, use of brutal force, and political opportunism. As de Waal shared, every primatologist goes through a phase of, if this is an animal, what am I? Politics and the power struggles in the chimpanzee colony are not fundamentally different from human hierarchies in organizations. Albert Einstein challenged assumptions in Isaac Newton's law of motion. In Newton's law of motion, time and distance govern how objects move when subjected to forces. But for the laws of motion to work, a condition needs to be fulfilled. Time and distance need to remain constant. Einstein discarded the assumption of universal time after he noticed that it was not just the length and time that depended on the motion of the observer, but the mass of an object also depended on the motion. The faster an object moves, the heavier it seems to be a stationary observer. By the end of 1905, Einstein had begun to understand the relationship between an object's energy, E, and its mass, m, and developed the famous formula E equals mc squared. Then, in the 1930s, Alan Turing challenged Einstein's idea of distance. Alan wrote, "It is meaningless to ask whether the 2 points are always the same distance apart, as you stipulate that distance is your unit and your ideas have to go by that definition. These ways of measuring are really conventions. You modify your laws to suit your method of measurement." In educational leadership, shared decision-making has been treated as a universal principle. There was nothing in shared decision-making that explained how it should be done correctly. Let's visit assumptions about shared decision-making. One assumption is that every group member shares information he or she has. This assumption doesn't hold in many organizational decision-making settings. You are unlikely to share a piece of unique information in a meeting if those who have more power than you dominate a group discussion. If your supervisor has frequently overruled your group's collective decision in the past, and if a majority of group members think in the same way, also known as groupthink. Under those circumstances, shared decision-making does not produce quality decisions, but waste organizational resources such as time that can be devoted to do real work instead of sham meetings as a facade of shared decision-making. One of the consequences of developing your research based on an uncritical application of an existing theory is that your research is rife with confirmation bias. The confirmation bias refers to people's tendency to search for and interpret evidence in a way that validates a predetermined assumption or conclusion. Our information seeking is guided by selective attention and avoidance. We see what we want to see. The confirmation bias not only influences where we go to collect data, but also how we interpret evidence. We usually cherry-pick information, bending reality in our desired directions. Our information seeking is guided by selective attention and avoidance. We see what we want to see. The confirmation bias not only influences where we go to collect the data, but also how we interpret evidence. We usually cherry-pick information, bending reality in our desired directions. An example is that you read something about the construct of trust and you find it intriguing. You then develop a research study to examine whether and how leaders' trust in their teammates can increase team performance. Is this a research study? Yes. Is it a good research study that I will invest my time in reading? Probably not. I won't learn anything new except for the importance of trust, which I've already known. This is an article about the relationship between poverty, racial composition, trust, and academic achievement. The article was published in 2009. I've already known about the importance of trust since 2009. After more than 10 years, if your article still investigates the potential positive relationship between trust and student achievement, I won't spend my time reading it because I won't learn anything new. If you are my student and you propose to study the relationship between trust and organizational performance, my comment would be, your research question can be answered by literature review. What's your rationale of conducting another empirical research to confirm something we've already known? If you can provide a compelling argument, I'd say, great idea, go for it. But that doesn't happen very often. But I'll be interested in a study that challenges an assumption of a frequently used definition of trust, which includes 5 facets of trust: benevolence, reliability, competence, honesty, and openness. Those 5 facets imply that trust is built on relatively long-term social interactions to know whether an individual is benevolent, reliable, competent, honest, and open. But humans make the judgment of trustworthiness very fast, in about 100 milliseconds, that is 1/10 of a second. And this judgment is influenced by many factors, such as clothing, physical appearance, body language, and social groups our social partners belong to. As a result, there are costs of trust in organizations. Leaders tend to promote those who are trustworthy by the virtue of the membership in the right group, rather than those who have merit. Leaders tend to reproduce themselves in kind, placing more trust in those who are one of us than those who are one of them. This is where the implicit assumptions of trust break down. How to reconcile different mental processes of trust. This is where you can come in to make your theoretical contributions. Assumptions of a theory are often unstated, at least not explicitly stated. Those assumptions are sometimes problematic or outdated. As you read literature, you'll need to inject a healthy dose of skepticism. Be a bold thinker, challenge assumptions, stir up a hornet's nest. You are encouraged to take off in a new direction or throw cold water on an existing construct or theory. There might be some inconsistency lurking in dark corners of a theory. You may find some existing theories or even prevailing theories proposed by distinguished scholars are on shaky ground. Now it is time for you to pause this video and write down what unstated assumptions of the constructs you'd like to include in your theoretical framework. The presence of distinguished scholars could be either a good or bad thing. This is like power can be used for good or a bad cause. The presence of distinguished scholars can be problematic if they exert undue influences on the direction of a research community. There is a risk that the distinguished scholars can define what research is being conducted and create a monopoly on which ideas are accepted uncritically in the research community and which ideas are considered interesting and acceptable to a research community. As a physicist Max Planck pointed out, a new scientific truth does not triumph by convincing its opponents and making them see the light, but rather because its opponents eventually die and a new generation grows up that is familiar with it. An important scientific innovation rarely makes its way by gradually winning over and converting its opponents. It rarely happens that Saul becomes Paul. What does happen is that its opponents gradually die out and that the growing generation is familiarized with the ideas from the beginning. Another instance of the fact that the future lies with the youth. Planck's view of the sociology of scientific knowledge was echoed in a recently published article titled, "Does Science Advance One Funeral at a Time?" In this article, authors argued poignantly, while outsiders appear reluctant to challenge leadership within a field when the star is alive, the loss of a luminary provides an opportunity for fields to evolve in new directions that advance the frontier of knowledge. If you want to forge your own path in academia, one way is to start by questioning assumptions of existing theories. Again, scientific consensus does not mean truth. Michael Crichton once said, "Historically, the claim of consensus has been the first refuge of scoundrels. It is a way to avoid debate by claiming that the matter is already settled. Whenever you hear the consensus of scientists agrees on something or other, reach for your wallet because you are being had. Let's be clear, the work of science has nothing whatever to do with the consensus. Consensus is the business of politics. Science, on the contrary, requires only one investigator who happens to be right, which means that he or she has results that are verifiable by reference to the real world." The second thing you need to do as you read extensively is that you need to identify competing theories. Competing theories, debates, and controversies are healthy for the advances of a scientific field. Mixed conclusions in literature signal where you can come in to use your research as an attempt to settle the matter. Scholarly disagreement may make you uncomfortable, but it has at least one benefit. When scholars have opposing theories to explain a phenomenon, any claim or evidence of any substantial importance proposed by one side is meticulously checked and double-checked by the other side. As a result, either side pays intense attention to its theoretical argument, as well as technical processes and data interpretation used to substantiate their argument. Any error could derail their argument, even diminish their credibility. This scrutiny of competing ideas is a check on the integrity of science. Scholars who aspire to claims of importance and who hope to sustain a lasting career in science protect themselves against the risk of error by being honest and self-criticism. Distributed leadership has been a frequently used theory in educational leadership research since the 2000s. It highlights the importance of distributing power from an individual, for example, a school principal, to multiple people, such as a leadership team. However, distributed leadership may clash with diffusion of responsibility. When you are the only one to shoulder responsibility, you have no excuse but to get things done. But when you share responsibility with others, you are likely to assume that others could and will take care of tasks. The mere presence of others diffuses the sense of personal responsibility, of any individual to get involved and reinforces mutual denial of the gravity of a situation. Here, I do not presume to settle the clash between distributed leadership and the diffusion of responsibility. Rather, I advocate caution in embracing distributed leadership without examining its underlying assumptions. Competing theories may be driven by different epistemologies. It is a good thing if a field has diverse epistemologies. It propels a field to move forward if you engage in intellectual discussions with someone outside of your intellectual bubble and evaluate your own views skeptically. Unfortunately, there has not been much discussion on competing theories in the field of educational leadership. The third thing you need to do as you read extensively is that you need to ask what is missing. As you expose yourself to different explanations of educational leadership, you are encouraged to identify the literature gap. To do so, you ask what is missing in literature. What are different explanations of educational leadership? Consider the construct of social capital. It has been defined as the sum of the resources, actual or virtual, that accrue to an individual or group by virtue of possessing a durable network of more or less institutionalized relationship of mutual acquaintance and recognition. Let's apply this definition of social capital to a 3-member team you see on the screen. Suppose that a team has 3 members. Abby has skill A, Brian has skill B, and Carter has skill C. What does the team social capital look like? Is the social capital of your team equal to the sum of skills A, B, and C? You may think the team's social capital is the sum of resources, which are skills A plus B plus C. Let's consider a different scenario. Here, Abby works with Brian. Together, they generate idea X. Then idea X inspires Carter to generate idea Y. In this case, skills A, B, and C collectively have transcended into idea Y. The whole is different from the sum of its parts. This idea is known as emergence. Idea Y emerged from a social system that is comprised of Abby, Brian, and Carter, who interact with one another. The collective performance of this social system is not a simple addition of each member's performance, which is skills A plus B plus C, but something categorically different, which is idea Y. However, it is also common for a team to fail even when every team member has needed skills and resources. Having people with the right skills is necessary but not sufficient. Here is another scenario. Abby and Brian have a personality clash. They may be jealous of each other. They may both have high implicit power motivation and have a strong desire for dominance. It is also possible that Brian believed that Abby is unfairly rewarded for her work, or a team supervisor shows favoritism towards Abby repeatedly. Regardless, Abby and Brian purposely withhold information that is needed for each other's work. They don't seem to work well together. This leaves Carter alone, who feels frustrated and demoted because of the troubling team dynamics. What's the team's social capital in this scenario? Is it possible that the team falls apart even when each team member has needed skills and resources? The non-linear process of social capital I described above is similar to collective efficacy of a team. To understand collective efficacy, we need to look at self-efficacy first. Self-efficacy in general refers to one's belief that he or she can successfully take actions to accomplish certain tasks or achieve goals. Albert Bandura described self-efficacy as a person's belief in their ability to organize and execute courses of action required to attain designated types of performance. To evaluate self-efficacy, you can use surveys to measure 4 sources of self-efficacy: mastery experience, that is successfully performing a task; vicarious experience, that is having a role model; social persuasion, that is feedback or a pep talk; and affective states, which is feeling hopeful and excited. Like social capital, collective teacher efficacy is an emergent property. At a group level, collective efficacy is not a simple addition of individual self-efficacy. Rather, it is the group's shared belief in its conjoined capabilities to organize and execute courses of action required to produce given levels of attainments. For example, in 1777, Benjamin Franklin, Arthur Lee, and John Adams were appointed by Congress as commissioners to France. Adams soon noticed that my 2 colleagues would agree on nothing. Adams believed his 2 colleagues were men of honor and integrity, but concluded that the uncandor, the prejudices, the rage among several persons here make me sick as death. Once you put a team of experts together and allow them to interact, strange things sometimes begin to happen. The team's collective efficacy is different from the sum of its parts. The team sometimes wrestle with navigating team dynamics created by strong personalities. Grounded in a theoretical understanding of collective efficacy as an emergent property which is different from the sum of its parts, to measure collective efficacy in school context, you need to look at individuals' perceptions of their group's shared belief as a whole, such as teachers in this school can get through to the most difficult students. The second step to develop a theoretical framework is to identify and define constructs. As you read an article, you decompose a theory into its component parts, that is, constructs and relationships, such that you can properly specify and understand constructs and relationships before writing them up in a draft theoretical framework. To build a house of theoretical framework, you need to first find constructs as stones. These steps can be especially tricky because you have so much latitude. What is the difference between empathy and sympathy? In a recently published article titled "Toward a Theory of Sympathetic Leadership, Asian American School Administrators' Expectations for Justice and Excellence," Daniel Liu and Jia Grace Liang devoted an entire section to define sympathetic leadership. They drew on existing literature, critiqued the downsides of a frequently used term, empathy, such as being misguided by stereotypes, and justified why they preferred to use the phrase sympathetic leadership. Their section serves as an exemplar for you as you work to define your constructs. Let's look at how justice, equity, and fairness have been defined. What is justice exactly? Asking different scholars in educational leadership, you get different answers. Some scholars use justice and equity interchangeably. David DeMatthews described social justice leadership as a commitment to improving the experience and outcomes of students who are most marginalized and disadvantaged. This leadership style is characterized by a pattern of behavior of using communication, community, empathy, and personal relationships to inspire, lead, reform systems, and lean into policies and practices that perpetuate inequities in various forms, including race and disability. According to De Matthews' definition, justice includes equity, but it is unclear whether it includes fairness. So, what does it mean by justice? Justice is such a spacious phrase that anyone can squeeze their work into the domain of justice and equity. If you study this topic in educational leadership, you need to define your constructs carefully. In an article titled, "When Equity Seems Unfair, the Role of Justice Enforceability in Temporary Team Coordination," Melissa Valentine defined equity by norms used to distribute work. First, each team member's skills and experience. Second, team members' prior workload. And third, team members' current workload and availability. Here, equity was based on team members' needs. By contrast, fairness meant the distribution of work is exactly equal. In Valentine's article, equity became unfair when a leader allowed team members to take advantage of other members' work. For example, Abby takes a break and asks her team members to do her work. Out of compassion and kindness, Abby's team members agree to help her out. But Abby does it repeatedly. Even worse, Abby is not reciprocal, not helping others when they need Abby to lend a hand. If a leader does not enforce fairness, when Abby is taking advantage of her team members, then the need-based equity becomes unfair. Such unfair treatment left Abby's team members demotivated. In Valentine's study, Abby's team members withheld their work efforts and filed more complaints about unfair work distribution than those who worked in a fair team. Justice, equity, and equality are not only studied in social sciences such as educational leadership. They have also been studied in neuroscience in an article titled "The Emerging Social Neuroscience of Justice Motivation." Authors offered clear definitions to those terms. Equality referred to all parties receive the same outcome. Equity referred to invested parties receive outcomes that may not be equal but are proportional with respect to need, effort, and merit. Justice referred to a system of normative rules and principles concerning the impartial allocation of rights, responsibilities, and resources in society. Those clear definitions laid a solid foundation for the author's argument on the construct of justice motivation, which was defined as people's tendency to prefer justice and strive for justice in their own life and the life of others. Another example is about race and ethnicity. Race is a social construct, whereas ethnicity is a biological construct. Barack Obama has a white mother. Kamala Harris' mother came from India. Those ancestries are related to ethnicity. However, the racial category of Black is fluid, as are other racial categories. As Obama put it, there is more than one authentic way of being Black. In human genomics literature, the use of race has decreased from 22% of papers in the 1950s to 4% papers in the 2010s. Meanwhile, the use of ancestry and ethnicity have been on the rise in human genomics literature. When race is used in genetics paper today, it is more likely to be accompanied by the terms ethnicity or ancestry, perhaps because the ambiguity of the terms led researchers to simply combine them and therefore dodge their definitions. Further complicating the matter is a long-standing system of American governmental classification that requires scientists to design all their research with official racial categories. Those categories were established in 1977 at the behest of the U.S. Congress in the wake of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and 1968, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, and a formation of many new federal offices and agencies. Congress directed its Office of Management Budget to produce a government-wide set of racial categories in order to monitor and redress social inequality. The Office of Management Budget Directive Number 15 of 1977 directed federal agencies to use the U.S. Census racial taxonomy to collect and monitor minority participation in public services. Directive Number 15's initial classification were American Indian or Alaska Native, Asian, Black or African American, Native Hawaiian, and other Pacific Islander, and white. Do you notice a problem? In the federal policy, Hispanic is not a race, but an ethnicity. You can imagine how much confusion the U.S. Census racial categories have created. Definitions or labeling are an entry point to further discussion. With clear definitions, we then use reasons and evidence to form an adequate argument and further discussion. Unfortunately, theories and constructs in educational leadership are like a terminological jungle in which anyone can plant a tree. Take a look at a list of terms here: shared leadership, shared instructional leadership, teacher leadership, collective leadership, distributed leadership, participative leadership, and democratic leadership. Those terms are used by some scholars differently, but by others interchangeably. If you strive to be a good scholar, you need to define constructs clearly in your research, regardless of how self-explanatory it is to you. The third step to develop a theoretical framework is to build a house from stones. After identifying and defining constructs, you need to put those constructs together. Let's go back to the analogy of constructs as stones and the theoretical framework as a house. A pile of stone is not a theoretical framework yet. You need to put them together by using logical reasoning and empirical evidence. After giving some thought to social capital, you may hypothesize that non-linearity should be a property of social capital. But your hypothesis don't come out of a vacuum. Your observation of how the whole is different from the sum of its parts prompted you to conduct thought experiments about the social dynamics among Abby, Brian, and Carter. Your thought experiments then prompted you to read more. Next, you came across complexity theory. It is a theory that created a burst of enthusiasm in the field of leadership in the 1990s. Again, like most theories, complexity theory is still mutating without an agreed-on definition. As Neil Johnson put it, there is no unique definition of complexity. Instead, the scientific notion of complexity, and hence a complex system, has been traditionally conveyed using particular examples of real-world systems which scientists believed to be complex. For the time being, let's consider that a complex system is composed of many different parts that interact and produce emergent properties that are greater than the sum of their parts. Moreover, those emergent properties cannot be reduced to the properties of the constituent parts. The classic example that is easily understandable is traffic. If you look at car parts, you won't be able to predict a traffic pattern, which is an emergent property. The emergent property is generated from the interactions of all the cars. their drivers, traffic rules, weather, roads, random animals, time, space, and who knows what else that traffic emerges from. The examples of a complex system are popping up all of the places if you observe the world around you. The emergence of a city, weather and the climate in general, the spread of infectious disease, ecosystems, the internet, and the human brain. If complexity theory can explain so many complex systems, then you can probably develop a theoretical framework which is grounded in complexity theory to explain that social capital in a school organization should have an emergent property. The whole is different from the sum of its parts. Here is another example. You've already learned that empowerment is motivating and leaders should empower others in order to motivate others. You read more on empowerment and find a definition of empowering leadership, which is the process of implementing conditions that enable sharing power with an employee. The literature appears to report all positive effects of empowering leadership, such as on team performance and creativity. You then come across Abraham Lincoln's quote, "If you want to test a man's character, give him power." You also come across Lord Acton's famous aphorism, "Power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely." You then read an article titled "How Power Corrupts Relationships: Cynical Attributions for Others' Generous Acts." With what you've learned about negative effects of having power, you think to yourself, is it possible that empowering leadership encourages team members who now have more power to abuse their power, such as using power for self-serving purposes at the expense of others? With this question, you develop a theoretical framework to explain the relationship between empowering leadership and team members' deviance, which is defined as voluntary behavior that violates significant organizational norms and in so doing threatens the well-being of the organization and/or its members. If you want to dig deeper, you may want to specify the boundaries of the relationship between empowering leadership and the team members' deviance. After all, not all team members abuse their entrusted power. Literature suggests that 2 traits of team members may increase the explanatory potency. The first trait is team members' moral identity, which is defined as a self-conception organized around a set of moral traits, such as fairness, kindness, and honesty. The second trait is team members' desire for dominance, which is defined as the use of force, coercion, and the selfish manipulation of group resources, and to prioritize one's own power at the expense of others. If you follow this thought process, you may develop a theoretical framework like a research team did in their article titled "The Unintended Consequences of Empowering Leadership: Increased Deviance for Some Followers." To make the theoretical framework reader-friendly, you can illustrate the framework by using building blocks, lines, and arrows to illustrate your hypothesized relationships. In my theoretical framework of emotions in leaders' decision-making, I illustrated relationships among different constructs. Lines and arrows show how emotions prior to, at the moment of, and post decision-making influence behaviors of leaders and organizational members. Those relationships, as illustrated in arrows, don't come out of nowhere. They are grounded in the empirical literature. Here it goes back to the importance of reading. You need to read extensively and critically. None of the theories introduced here is perfect or satisfactory to its full extent. Theories and constructs are not set in stone. They are constantly mutating, propelled by theoretical arguments and empirical evidence. With the expansion of scientific discoveries in different disciplines, you should always have fresh appraisals of existing constructs and theories. It is your charge to develop theoretical frameworks that guide your research to refine and refute our current understanding of educational leadership. As you develop your theoretical framework, make sure that you complete the 5 statements here. These 5 statements help you sort out what, when, how, and why. Together, they ensure that your theoretical framework functions as a guide to generate predictions and as an anchor for data collection and analysis. First, the phenomenon that I am interested in is. Second, my theoretical framework seeks to explain. Third, the core constructs in my theoretical framework are. Fourth, the boundary conditions of my theoretical framework are. And fifth, the mechanisms underlying relationships in my theoretical framework are. I look forward to a body of educational leadership literature in which scholars read broadly and critically, challenge assumptions, develop competing theories, refine constructs that have been confusing to many, and apply theories to practical ends in leadership practices. The progress of a scientific field requires scholars to continuously reinterpret data, reassess their validity, and reformulate constructs and theories. If you want to know more about how to build a theoretical framework for your research, I have published a book titled Demystify Theories, a workbook for developing theoretical frameworks of educational leadership research. The link of the book is in the description below.